I will begin with Bruno, my wife's pet sloth bear. I got him for her by accident. 2 years ago we were passing through the sugarcane fields near Mysore. People were driving away the wild pigs from the fields by shooting at them. Some were shot and some escaped. We thought that everything was over when suddenly a black sloth bear came out panting in the hot sun. Now I will not shoot a sloth bear wantonly, but, unfortunately for the poor beast, one of my companions did not feel that way about it, and promptly shot the bear on the spot. As we watched the fallen animal, we were surprised to see that the black fur on its back moved and left the prostrate body. Then we saw it was a baby bear that had been riding on its mother's back. When the sudden shot had killed her, the little creature ran around its prostrate parent, making a pitiful noise. I ran up to it to attempt to capture. It scooted into the sugarcane field. Following it with my companions, I was at last able to grab it by the scruff of its neck while it snapped and tried to scratch me with its long, hooked claws. We put it in one of the gunny bags we had brought, and when I got back to Bangalore I duly presented it to my wife. She was delighted. She at once put a colored ribbon around its neck, and after discovering the cub was a boy, she christened it Bruno. Bruno soon took to drinking milk from a bottle. It was but a step further, and within a very few days he started eating and drinking everything else. And everything is the right word, for he ate porridge, made from any ingredients, vegetables, fruit, nuts, meat, curry and rice regardless of condiments and chilies, bread, eggs, chocolates, sweets, pudding, and ice cream. As for drink, milk, tea, coffee, lime juice, aerated water, buttermilk, beer, alcoholic liquor, and, in fact, anything liquid. It all went down with relish. The bear became very attached to our 2 Alsatian dogs and to all the children of the tenants living in our bungalow. He was left quite free in his younger days and spent his time in playing, running to the kitchen and going to sleep in our beds. One day an accident befell him. I put down poison, barium carbonate, to kill the rats and mice that had got into my library. Bruno entered the library, as he often did, and he ate some of the poison. Paralysis set in to the extent that he could not stand on his feet, but he dragged himself on his stumps to my wife, who called me. I guessed what had happened. Off I rushed in the car to the vet's residence. A case of poisoning. Tame bear, barium carbonate, what to do? Out came his medical books, and a feverish reference to index began. What poison did you say, sir? Barium carbonate. Ah yes, barium salts. Barium carbonate. Symptoms: paralysis, treatment, injections of. Just a minute, sir. I'll bring my syringe and the medicine. A dash back to the car. Bruno still floundering about on his stumps, but clearly weakening rapidly, some vomiting, heavy breathing, with heaving flanks and gaping mouth. Hold him, everybody. In goes the hypodermic. Bruno squeals. 10 cc of the antidote enters his system without a drop being wasted. 10 minutes later, condition unchanged. Another 10 cc injected. 10 minutes later, breathing less stertorous of Bruno can move his arms and legs a little, although he cannot stand yet. 30 minutes later, Bruno gets up and has a great feed. He looks at us disdainfully, as much as to say, "What's barium carbonate to a big black bear like me?" Bruno is still eating. Another time he found nearly 1 gallon of old engine oil which I had drained from the sump of the Studebaker and was keeping as a weapon against the inroads of termites. He promptly drank the lot. But it had no ill effects whatever. The months rolled on and Bruno had grown many times the size he was when he came. He had equaled the Alsatians in height and had even outgrown them, but was just as sweet, just as mischievous, just as playful. And he was very fond of us all. Above all, he loved my wife, and she loved him too. She had changed his name from Bruno to Baba, a Hindustani word signifying small boy. And he could do a few tricks, too. At the command, "Baba, wrestle," or "Baba, box," he vigorously tackled anyone who came forward for a rough and tumble. Give him a stick and say, "Baba, hold gun," and he pointed the stick at you. Ask him, "Baba, where's baby?" And he immediately produced and cradled affectionately a stump of wood which he had carefully concealed in his straw bed. But because of the tenant's children, poor Bruno, or Baba, had to be kept chained most of the time. Then my son and I advised my wife, and friends advised her too, to give Baba to the zoo at Mysore. He was getting too big to keep at home. After some weeks of such advice she at last consented. Hastily, and before she could change her mind, a letter was written to the curator of the zoo. Did he want a tame bear for his collection? He replied, yes. The zoo sent a cage from Mysore in a lorry, a distance of 87 miles, and Baba was packed off. We all missed him greatly, but in a sense we were relieved. My wife was inconsolable. She wept and fretted. For the first few days she would not eat a thing. Then she wrote a number of letters to the curator. How was Baba? Back came the replies. Well, but fretting, he refuses food too. After that, friends visiting Mysore were begged to make a point of going to the zoo and seeing how Baba was getting along. They reported that he was well, but looked very thin and sad. All the keepers at the zoo said he was fretting. For 3 months I managed to restrain my wife from visiting Mysore. Then she said one day, "I must see Baba. Either you take me by car, or I will go myself by bus or train." So I took her by car. Friends had conjectured that the bear would not recognize her. I had thought so too. But while she was yet some yards from his cage, Baba saw her and recognized her. He howled with happiness. She ran up to him, petted him through the bars, and he stood on his head in delight. For the next 3 hours she would not leave that cage. She gave him tea, lemonade, cakes, ice cream and what not. Then closing time came and we had to leave. My wife cried bitterly, Baba cried bitterly, even the hardened curator and the keepers felt depressed. As for me, I had reconciled myself to what I knew was going to happen next. "Oh please, sir," she asked the curator, "may I have my Baba back?" Hesitantly, he answered, "Madam, he belongs to the zoo and is government property now. I cannot give away government property. But if my boss, the superintendent at Bangalore, agrees, certainly you may have him back." There followed the return journey to Bangalore and a visit to the superintendent's bungalow. A tearful pleading, "Baba and I are both fretting for each other. Will you please give him back to me?" He was a kind-hearted man and consented. Not only that, but he wrote to the curator telling him to lend us a cage for transporting the bear to Bangalore. Back we went to Mysore again, armed with the superintendent's letter. Baba was driven into a small cage and hoisted on top of the car. The cage was tied securely, and a slow and careful return journey to Bangalore was accomplished. Once home, a squad of coolies were engaged for special work in our compound. An island was made for Baba. It was 20 feet long and 15 feet wide, and was surrounded by a dry pit, or moat, 6 feet wide and 7 feet deep. A wooden box that once housed fowls was brought and put on the island for Baba to sleep in at night. Straw was placed inside to keep him warm, and his baby, the gnarled stump, along with his gun, the piece of bamboo, both of which had been sentimentally preserved since he had been sent away to the zoo, were put back for him to play with. In a few days the coolies hoisted the cage onto the island and Baba was released. He was delighted. Standing on his hind legs, he pointed his gun and cradled his baby. My wife spent hours sitting on a chair there while he sat on her lap. He was 15 months old and pretty heavy too. The way my wife reaches the island and leaves, it is interesting. I have tied a rope to the overhanging branch of a mango tree with a loop at its end. Putting. 1 foot in the loop, she kicks off with the other, to bridge the 6-foot gap that constitutes the width of the surrounding pit. The return journey is made the same way. But who can say now that a sloth bear has no sense of affection, no memory, and no individual characteristics?